Hey guys, getting ready to start our literature lesson for today. We'll be starting our new unit. So if you take your literature books and open up to page 346, we're going to start our last unit of literature for the year. Let's do a quick recap, though, of the units that we've done so far this year. We started out the year talking about conflict and the different types of conflict. Then we did a unit on characters and on character development and how there are different kinds of characters. You have dynamic characters, static characters, flat characters, round characters. So we did that study on character development. Then we had in the next unit talking about plot and how the structure of plot, how we have our action, our building action, then we have our climax interaction, and then we have the falling action leading to our ending. So we talked about plot structure. Then after that, we talked about theme. In our last unit, we were talking about how each story has a theme to it or a main idea that the author is trying to get across. That brings us to our final unit, which is our unit on the tone of a story. Every story has a moral tone to it that the author is using to tell the story. So we want to talk about a moral tone. The moral tone, what do I mean by moral tone? The moral tone is like the overriding philosophy of the story, and that tone is going to affect everything in the story. It's going to affect the characters, the plot, the conflict, the resolution, and all of those will make up the theme. And so that moral tone is going to affect all of those different elements. And you see that little diagram there in your book on page 346. So, an excellent story, though, for a story to be a good story, it doesn't mean that it is free of all negative behaviors and all negative characters. We can still have a story that's a good story. It could have some negative characters in it, some negative behaviors in it. Um, but the key is that those characters and their behavior are not portrayed as being praiseworthy. Instead, we need to see how that objectionable material is presented. Is it presented in a way that shows, hey, this is wrong, and these bad guys or objectionable characters are going to get what they deserve? Or is the story turning that around and making it look like, oh, the bad guy is the one that we want to sympathize with, or we hope that, everything turns out okay for him, or is the wrong action, is the wrong punished, or is it not? So we want to look at that when we're reading the story. So we're trying to teach you to learn to be discerning in your reading when you're reading stories, because Mrs. Mead isn't going to always be there to tell you, hey, that's a good story and that's not a good story. You have to learn to become a discerning reader, to know what is good for you to be reading. So you want to look and see, how is that story portraying the objectionable material? Is it going along with the truths of God's word, or is it against the truths of God's word? So as you're discerning, as you're reading and discerning, let me give you some questions that you would want to ask. First of all, you'd want to ask, are the characters that we like in the story, the ones that we like or that we sympathize with, are they good, noble characters? Or is the story trying to get us sympathize with, or to like the evil characters? Okay, that's the first question. Secondly, do the actions of the story cause us to desire virtue and good and reject vice and bad? Or the other way around, is the story trying to get us to reject what is good and to like what is bad? Third question you would want to ask is, does the story's resolution, does it punish evil and reward good? Or is it the opposite? Is it going to punish the good and show that evil wins, or evil was the right choice? Okay. And then lastly, does the theme or the message of the story conflict with God's truth? Now, we don't want to read stories, or we want to be aware of a story if we're reading it and you're like, well, this just is not, this goes against what God's truth says. This goes against what the Bible teaches. You need to be aware of that. And so that doesn't mean that every story that we read has to be by a Christian author. There are authors who are not Christian who write great stories. And so it doesn't mean that you have to only read things that are by Christian authors. All truth is God's truth. whether the author realizes it or not, whether the author is a Christian or not, if they are telling a story that is showing God's truth, even if they don't mean to, right? It's still God's truth. So when you're reading, you need to look at what you're reading in light of these different things. So let's take a story that we've already read this year and apply those principles to a story that we've read. So let's talk about the 40 Thieves that we read not too long ago. There's no arguing that the 40 Thieves is a story of high literary merit, right? It has good characters, has conflict, it has characters that are artfully developed. The plot is well constructed. The story is doesn't have any just flagrantly obvious objectionable elements in it. But what about the moral tone of the story? Let's think about that for a minute. Let's look first at the characters. Remember the main character, Ali Baba, right? The main person, although he's not what we'd say maybe a noble character, the author wants us to sympathize with him, right? But let's think about it for a minute. Isn't Ali Baba a thief? Now, it's true he's more noble than his brother Qasim, but think about Ali Baba and what he did. He saw where the treasures were hidden, and he got into the cave and he stole much treasure out of the cave and took it back home and kept it, and was never punished for it, never received any type of bad result for his stealing. Now, yes, he was stealing from thieves, that is true, but he's still stealing, which makes him a thief. He wasn't stealing back his own goods, they weren't his to begin with. So he was a thief. And so, although you look at Kasim and say, well, he was a thief and then he had negative consequences, right? Because they found him and they cut him into four quarters and hung him up, all over the cave. That is true. But Alibaba's actions of stealing, the what happens to him in the story seems to justify that he was stealing because things turned out okay. He was never punished for his thievery. His slave Morgiana kind of took care of everything for him, and everything turned out okay. Speaking of Morgiana, let's look at her for a minute. Now, when she put the chalk marks on the house, obviously there was nothing wrong with that. That was fine for her to do that. But what about the other things that she did? When she poured hot oil and killed all those other thieves, right? Was that a right thing for her to do? So we kind of need to look at these other things that she did, seeing that the kind of that message that is portrayed through some of these things in the story would go against the Christian viewpoint, right? Now, this story, of course, is very mild. There are a lot of stories with a much more negative moral tone to them, but I just wanted to give that as an example so that you can just be thinking that way when you're reading something, just to be discerning about what the story is trying to teach. Okay, so let's talk about the play actually that we're going to be reading, Cyrano de Bergerac. Now, I'm sorry, usually when we get to this point in the unit, when we read a play, plays are meant to be read out loud. And usually we read these out loud in class, and I assign different people to play the different characters, and it's so much fun. So I'm sorry that we are going to miss out on that, at least for a couple weeks. Hopefully we'll be able to do that a little bit further on in the future because it is a lot of fun. Plays are meant to be dramatized and read out loud. So just do your best as you're reading it to yourself, just to imagine different characters. Maybe you can pull some family members in to read with you, and you could be different characters and read it out loud that way. That might be kind of fun. But let me just give you a little background about this play here, Cyrano de Bergerac. Cyrano was actually a real person. So this play is based on a real person, although it's not true. It is still a fictional story, but it is based on a real person. Cyrano was a real person. He was not a Gascon, as in this story. Cyrano de Bergerac is from Gascony, France. The real Cyrano was from Paris. He was a soldier for 10 years, just like in this story. Cyrano is a soldier, and he was injured, and then he turned to writing. He became a writer. Well, in our story, Cyrano is a soldier. He does get injured. He is also a writer, a poet, a critic, a friend. He's kind of, as you read it, you'll get the impression that this Cyrano is like this perfect guy who just can do everything and can do everything well. But he has one problem, and that is, as you can see in the picture, he has a very, very large nose. Now, the real Cyrano probably, I would guess his nose was not quite this large. But for the play, the purposes of the play, this Cyrano de Bergerac has a very, very large nose, and that's an important part of the plot of this play. So this guy, Cyrano, even though he has everything going for him, he's this brave soldier and he's very smart and he can write plays and poetry and can do all these other things, but he's ugly. And so he is in love with this woman named Roxanne, but he never professes his love to her because he is afraid that she could not love him back because he is ugly, because of his nose. So he doesn't ever tell her that, but he wants her to be happy. And this Roxanne that he is in love with is actually his cousin. You'll notice as we're reading, and before you think, oh, that's just weird. Just you have to remember the time period. This is 1600s, and remember the area of the world, right, in Europe where this was taking place. During this time period, that was very common for people to marry their cousins. So I know to us it sounds very weird, but for them it was something that was done quite often. So as we start off, as you look at page 350, you have there the list of the characters. You have Cyrano de Bergerac, who is the main character. Then you have Roxanne, his cousin, the beautiful woman that he's fallen in love with. Then you have what's called Roxanne's duenna. That's like her lady's maid. It's an older woman who's always with Roxanne and helps her and just kind of takes care of her. Then we have Christian. Christian is another person he's also a soldier, but he is also in love with Roxanne. Then we have Lebret. Lebret is Cyrano's best friend. We have Ragueneau, who is a poet. He's also like a baker, a pastry cook. He has a shop where he sells food. Then we have Linière, who is another friend of Christian. Then we have the bad guy, Comte de Guiche. He's a bad guy, and he is also in love with Roxanne. And then we have Valvert, who's also another bad guy, a friend of de Guiche. We have Montfleury, who is an actor, and we'll see him right away in the first act. And then he's also in love with Roxanne. Then we have Lise, who is the wife of Ragueneau, and then Carbon, who comes in later on. He's the captain of the guard. So how we're going to do this is we're going to read a little bit of this each day. I'll assign a little bit to be read each day. And then at the end of each act, we will have a quiz. All right, so we'll read a little bit each day, and each act has several scenes. And when we get to the end of the act, then we will have a quiz over the act. So I will assign some pages for you to read, and then the next day we'll talk about the pages you read in case you didn't understand it, because some of the language is kind of different, and I'll make sure that you understood what happened and the stuff that you read the day before. So today's assignment is to read page 350 to 360. Okay, so let me just explain what's happening as you open up. As Act 1 opens, now imagine, right, this is a play. So if you were to be watching the play, imagine as the curtain opens on the play, the scene is a theater hall inside a hotel. And there's an audience there. They're all getting ready to watch this play. And included in that crowd of people that are waiting to watch the play, we have Christian, the one who is in love with Roxanne. He has come there because he wants to see Roxanne. He wants to meet her. He's in love with her, but he's never even met her. He's just seen her and seen that she's beautiful. And so he wants to come and get a chance to meet her. So she's there, or he's there. Roxanne is also going to be there to watch the play. Cyrano is also in the audience. He has come, but he is, no one knows he's there. He's trying to be incognito. He doesn't want anybody to know that he's there. He's kind of hiding in the crowd because Montfleury, the actor that is in this play, Cyrano hates Montfleury. He can't stand him. And he's vowed that if Montfleury tries to come out on the stage again, then he is going to try to stop any performance that he's in. So Cyrano is there to keep his promise and to disrupt this play that Montfleury is in because he can't stand him. So that's what's kind of happening as the curtain rises. They're lighting the candles and getting the theater hall ready for this play. Okay, so go ahead and read page 350 to 360. And then next time, then I will talk through kind of what happened in these pages so you can kind of understand what's going on and what has happened. So I hope you have a great weekend and enjoy reading the first few pages of Cyrano.